Welcome everyone to the last session in track A. We have two speakers today, myself and Inessa. I will introduce Inessa, and then we'll take turns here going through our content. And then towards the end, we'll have a few minutes for Q&A. Now, before we begin the session, just final notes. There's a chat window next to the video player. You can post any questions you may have on either my presentation or Inessa's presentation. You can post any technical issues, connect with all the attendees, and we'll do our best to get to those. And finally, be sure to check out the networking room where you can connect with some of the speakers and continue the conversation from today. Now, let me present Inessa. Inessa is the Director of Product Management and part of the Denodo's product management team and works closely with customers and prospects to understand their projects and requirements. With over 18 years of experience in the data integration, data quality, and master data management space, she's able to visualize an enterprise-level solution spanning different projects and different products. During her career, she was also a solutions architect and project manager, which enables her to understand different layers of project requirements, enterprise ecosystem, and organizational structure. Originally from Russia, she has a great passion for mathematics and physics, as well as travel in the world and unique experiences. So Inessa will come back in a few minutes with her presentation. On my end, my name is Ruben. I'm a data strategist at Practical Analytics, and I work with companies of all sizes to help them understand data and get more value out of it. This might mean implementation, strategy, training, and a few other different methodologies. Now, I want to share a few ideas on what it means to build a data-supported culture over the next few minutes. So let me share my screen. So just a few ideas in a few minutes. So when you think about a data-driven culture, a data-informed culture, or a data-supported culture, what comes to mind? So I want you to think about the different attributes that may support this definition. And those are the different things they want to work towards. Now, regardless of what your definition is, we need to have a unified term so we can have this conversation over the next 10 minutes. So here is 7 different ideas or elements that I think really makes up a data-driven culture. And some companies have all 7, some companies have a few of them. And of course, once you know what's working, what's not, it's much easier to then determine where to spend your time. So the 7 elements of a data-driven culture, in my opinion, are being able to collect and store the right data, aligning data with strategy and outcomes, democratizing access to data. We have heard many speakers talk about this idea. Dealing with some of the psychological issues of data, overwhelm, lack of trust, breaking through silos, providing the right training, and then managing expectations around data. So let me look at each one in turn, give you some examples and some ways on how to best think about how to level this specific item within your organization. So first, be able to collect the right data. We have heard many speakers talk about data warehouses, architecture. This entire track is really around architecture. And this is really the first point where we start and determine what is the right data, are we collecting it? So in your case, this might be structured data, semi-structured, unstructured, but we know to understand the different elements in the way your business operates. For some businesses, this is really quite simple. You have maybe a digital product and a very limited ecosystem in which you operate. Other businesses, complex multinationals, have a lot of different data points. But we know to collect it, centralize it, and quickly access it are all really under the world of data architecture. And as a company, you want to make sure and understand what the different gaps or some of the blind spots might be in your current data ecosystem. When you think about data architectures, whether they are as advanced as Airbnb or as small or as simple, perhaps as a smaller company, they typically have 5 major elements. There's a collection. This is where you might have ETLs that are collecting data from websites, from web apps, from systems, from offline sources. You have storage. This is where we talk about data warehouses, data lakes. There's some kind of cleaning that needs to happen. You might be transforming the data, organizing it. This is, of course, getting easier and easier. Then you want to visualize it, and you might have things like Tableau, Power BI, and a few other tools, and you want to monitor it to make sure that things are working as expected. So thinking about how you rate on the data collection and be able to use that data is really the first element of a data-driven. This is really the prerequisite before we can get to a few other things. Second is aligning strategy. I think it's sometimes easy to sort of get caught up in the technical details of technology. And remember, at the end of the day, data is just really meant to help a business grow. And if you're having issues tying it to some kind of tangible outcome, it's going to be really hard to be able to develop an analytics plan or strategy. So it's not so much about what you can do with technology, but how it can actually help the business either reduce costs, increase growth, find new customers, release new products. And this is really a shift from a purely technical approach to an approach that's focused much more on what's the technology do for us that it doesn't. Many of my clients, they're typically on the non-technical side of the business, whether they're executives or in the management team. And one of the biggest challenges is they don't fully understand the technical, and they're not quite sure why they're investing so much money into it. So being able to explain that is a major value for anyone on the technical side. And being able to align it is even more important. Number 3 is democratizing access to the data. We hear a lot about this word. It basically just means how easy it is for someone to actually use the data. Do they need to know SQL or some other technical language? Or do you have dashboards that are easy to create? They might not be as fast as SQL or perhaps as elaborate or sophisticated, but they have a way of doing it. And typically what you need here is multiple ways of accessing data. You want to be able to support those people who have advanced skills. They can query the database directly. You want to be able to support those people who may know Tableau or Power BI or something else. And then, of course, even have options for people to download the data into something like an Excel or CSV if you're working with limited quantities. But you want to make it easy, nonetheless. You want to reduce the friction, not have gatekeepers, and make it clear. I think one of the best things companies can do for data is make it so they trip on it. So it's available in dashboards and Slack and email, and it's just available everywhere. So it's easy to look at it. It's easy to interact with it. Next, we have human issues. And the human issues are really tricky because technology doesn't always solve them, right? You might have heard of things, for example, like data overwhelm. Now you have teams that have too much data, and you have a management team or executives or leaders who actually don't know how to actually process the data. What do you do with it? What's important, what's not, right? We saw that a lot in COVID-19 where there was all this data, but wasn't quite sure exactly what to do. You kind of knew what was going on at a high level of detail, especially a few months of the pandemic, but it wasn't quite clear what you should do next. And that's really all the realm of psychology and how do you deal with this. So in your companies, you want to think about how you actually going through these challenges. Are people being overwhelmed by the sheer volume of data that's being given to them, that's available to them when they create a dashboard? Do they trust the data? I'm constantly surprised when I run into companies and they just don't trust the numbers. They look at them and there's something weird about them, there's something kind of funky, but do they trust the numbers? And if they don't trust it, they're likely not going to use it, regardless of how advanced your data infrastructure might be. So all these challenges are really more on the people side. So they require more of a people approach, whether it's coaching, training, sometimes just merely explanations. Technology might be able to help a little bit, but our ability to process data is pretty static. Our ability to collect data from a technology perspective is rapidly increasing, exponentially increasing. But as humans, there's only so much data we can actually process at any given time. So how you design those dashboards, how data gets rolled out, what kind of support is given to people to access the data, it's all part of this one item. Next, we have silos. If you're driven around in the countryside, then you may have seen, there's big metal cylinders. And these are usually holding, some kind of farm product, grain or something. And companies, of course, you have the similar idea. You have the silos. You might have finance data that doesn't interact with marketing data, or sales data doesn't interact with operations data. In some companies, this is by design. Companies in the finance space, cryptocurrency, they might have a high level of regulation, and they want to protect the data from being too widely available. Nonetheless, we have to break through the silos, connect the data to different ways is another element of being data driven. And silos, like the previous point we talked about, it's really not so much about technology. It is really relatively straightforward to throw all the data into a data warehouse and then combine it and then make it talk to each other. It's really a question of politics, a question of how you make sure that data will be protected, that you're not going to have a concern that the legal compliance team is going to be okay making this data available to other teams. So how do you work through those? Who's responsible for working through all those different challenges and working with the different teams and making sure that their concerns are heard of? So how will you deal with silos to get rid of them at the beginning, and of course prevent them from being able to be created again? It's another element of how you think about data-driven culture. Next, we have training. So data is fantastic, but I keep seeing an assumption that everyone knows how to work with it. All you have to do is just give them the tools or the facts, and then people will be able to work with data. And I actually don't think that's the case. I am amazed at how many people I run into that don't actually even like math. They don't feel comfortable with math. It kind of makes them think of college, and it wasn't their favorite class. But the math we're talking about here at the analytics level within the marketing team or sales team and so on, this is not complex math. This is not the realm of data science and advanced models. This is really basic statistics, basic math, basic probabilities. And all those different skills can be taught. You can do them in workshops or training, one-on-one. You can choose the right approach. But this kind of training needs to be done so people become comfortable with the numbers, reading the numbers, and understanding what to do with the numbers. And this is really sort of the end goal of many data-driven companies, not this assumption that everyone needs an advanced degree to work with numbers, but that you can teach some of those basic ideas and basic ways of working with data. And lastly here, let me talk about expectations. So within your company, you want to make sure what expectations are being set around data. That is, it's expected that everyone's going to use it to back up opinions, to back up projects, new initiatives. It's expected that you're supposed to see it in meeting updates, in reports, in reviews. It's expected that you can get an answer out of the data within a few minutes, not days or weeks or months. So whatever expectations you have, they may be unspoken. They would then shape how your company and culture thinks about data. So think about those expectations. Look back at how your team thinks about it, how other teams think about data, and what is the best way to either level up those expectations, to meet them, or just improve them overall. And this, of course, may be completely different. You may have all the right pieces, the technology, the skills, but the expectations may not be there. So you can start to think about what is the missing gap from the sort of the 7 items that we talked about here when it comes time to build a data-driven culture. Great. So let me hand it over to Inessa, and then we'll go through a video, and then we can do a little Q&A after that.
Thank you all for joining. Today I would like to talk to you about the data management and how it has evolved for the future, how digital transformation and new technologies are driving the evolution of data management and a data fabric. First, let's look at what are we actually working with. Let's look at the data and the questions that we have to ask ourselves. When we look at the quadrants, we see different aspects of the data and the questions which can generate useful insights. But the technologies that we use to facilitate the data access are going to be different depending on the data itself and the business problem we're trying to solve. So first, if we are working in fact with the known data and well-structured data, and we are trying to address any business need, we can easily work with the data warehouse. We are familiar with data warehouses. We know how they function. We know how to work with them. The next overlay would be the use of data lakes. Data lakes are great when you are working with known and unknown data. It really enables you to have that large data store with all of the information so you can start asking different questions, so you can actually facilitate the work of a data scientist. Data scientist is truly responsible for figuring out the insights which relate to known and unknown data, and also to facilitate the responses to the questions that business is not even familiar with. They're trying to generate insights and generate business value while not knowing what type of questions to ask. So it's really different technologies, really different space, which is certainly evolving greatly with the evolution of the digital transformation. Operational intelligence is easy. It's when you're working with known data, you're working with the known questions, you really know what to ask for, and you really know what type of insights you're looking to generate. So when we look at this logical data warehouse as established by Gartner, we can see that different technologies are going to enable us to respond to different business challenges and technological challenges. And this is where the main point comes in is that there is no single technology, it's all part of the logical data warehouse. So what is the logical data warehouse? Logical data warehouse is the combination of complementing technologies which are going to drive your business to quickly generate useful business insight. It's no longer about using just ETL or ESB, transactional processing, or just data virtualization to access the data and make it accessible, but it's also about understanding that you're going to have different technology problems and you're going to have different business problems you are trying to solve. And different business problems are going to require you to use different techniques. So if we continue to look at the Gartner and just continue to look at the logical data warehouse, which is then going to take us to a logical data fabric, you can see that data virtualization is the critical point when we talk about data access as well as exposing data to other consumers. And you can see that it has been growing exponentially, and you can see that it has emerged as more dominant type of integration lifestyle. So what is this data fabric? What are we actually talking about? Let's look at a couple of the areas of the data fabric. Data fabric is promoted by both Forrester and Gartner, and the definitions they have are very consistent. For instance, Gartner is saying that the core of the matter is being able to consolidate many diverse data sources. Keep in mind, diverse. We are no longer talking about just data lakes or just data warehouse. It's diverse data sources across multiple ecosystems, across multiple divisions, and be able to officially expose the trusted data and deliver it to the relevant consumers. So it's not only delivering data to any consumer in any shape and form, it's about delivering trusted data and ensuring that that's exactly what the consumer is asking for. If I'm asking for customer information, I want to get customer information with the specific details I'm interested in. It's all about fulfilling the business use case and such decoupling of how the data is being stored, how the data is being processed, from what the business is looking for. If you look at it from the framework perspective, what does it look like? So data fabric is an overlay of different technologies which are working together, they're complementing each other, facilitating those different technological use cases such as trying to solve the data lake problems, the data warehouse problem, and essentially exposing data to the consumers. The key of the data fabric is that It's not only exposing data to the consumers, it's also utilizing AI internally to expose relevant data, and it also guides the consumer in generating business insights. It's all about getting value from the data. It's not only about seeing the data and being able to consume it, it's being able to figure out where the value of the data is. How can I enrich my customer information with social data? How can I enrich it with demographics? How can I enrich it with additional information available to me from all of the digital data sources? So when we look at it from the architecture perspective, there are six specific pillars of the data fabric, which you can see in many Gartner publications. We are talking about the data catalog. You need to be able to have a catalog of all the data accessible to you, as well as how the data is accessed, what information it has. And then on top of that, you need to be able to start and build a semantics model. Having customer information exposed just from the data itself is not really useful. You need to start building a semantics model which fulfills the business use case. So when we're talking about knowledge graphs, we are not talking about knowledge databases. We are talking about semantics model. We are talking about graph representation of different modules relating to each other. Having metadata is critical. And when we talk about metadata, it's not only static metadata about what type of information you have, the fields, the descriptions of the data itself. It's also about active metadata, how the data is being used, how frequently, what type of queries are being executed against the data, who is accessing the data. And all of that active metadata can be used to drive recommendations as part of the data fabric so the business user can easily find relevant data assets. Again, it's all about relevant data. It's not only about exposing data. So the generated recommendations can be used to drive the business insight, as well as they can be used to improve the performance of the application itself. So there are many different ways how you can use the active metadata to build up your business logic and to make data more accessible to more consumers. You also need to be able to deploy the solutions into any ecosystem. You have to support hybrid multi-cloud environments. The solution has to be flexible and it has to reside and be able to serve any deployment style. Today you might be on-prem or hybrid, tomorrow it might be multi-cloud. So let's look at how Denodo fits into different pillars of this data fabric. So let's start building on top of this. Let's see how specific capabilities of Denodo fulfill the six pillars of the logical data fabric. First, Denodo does offer a data catalog. Data catalog enables you to look into your virtualized data sources as well as look into the semantics model. And this is the whole concept of the cataloging of data. It has to show you data which you can access. On top of that, it has to show you the metadata about the information. So you can start generating business insights, you can query the data, and you can make it accessible to more business analysts. You don't want to go to different tools such as ESBs and ETLs and start moving the data. You just want to access the data. But the data also needs to be presented in a format that business user can understand. You're not going to tell a business user that you have customer information coming from 5 different data sources. They don't care where the data is coming from. They want to see a customer information or account information or patient or payer. So this is where semantics modeling comes into the picture, and you can utilize the graphical interface to drag and drop and create relationships between different entities and create your graph-like semantics model, which is going to build on top of your data and expose only relevant data to your business consumers. Then, since we are accessing data, you need to gather the statistics of how the data is being used. Exposing data is not very relevant by itself if you don't understand if the data is being useful. So Denoda actually does capture statistics, user statistics, and additional information, like profiling information, about the data being accessed and being exposed. And then that information can be used to drive recommendations. Keep in mind, one of those key aspects about the data fabric is recommendation. So using the information that we know about data access, we can drive recommendations and we can expose relevant data to you. Obviously, the data can be exposed in any form or shape, any standard API, and then it can be deployed. The solution can be deployed into any multi-cloud hybrid environment or any location. So if you look at the data virtualization is the middle layer between the consumers and the actual data sources. So how does it change the way we see the data management? So with data management, we do have an ecosystem of different data sources, and all the different data sources have different formats and are accessed using different APIs. Traditionally, when you start introducing different consumers in your ecosystem, those consumers are going to build pipelines for the data access. They're going to continue accessing the data directly. So if something has to change in this pipeline architecture and the data source has moved, or the consumer would like to get access to additional data source, this architecture has to change. So all of those pipelines are very hard to maintain. So this is where data fabric comes in. This is where data virtualization comes in. Data virtualization, again, is that middle layer between the consumers and the data sources, providing abstraction of any change on any side, such enabling the IT departments to utilize any IT technology, such as data lakes, data warehouses, moving the data, doing whatever they need to solve a data access problem, while business can continue using tools they are familiar with to still continue getting access to the data, regardless of the data location. So data virtualization, again, is part of the data fabric. It enables you to access any data anywhere and completely abstract all of the pain points from the consumption. So as the key takeaways, it's all about making data accessible and improving and enabling the data literacy in your ecosystem. Making data understandable and comprehensible. Consumer must understand the data they're accessing. It's also going to enable you, the data fabric is going to enable you to share data with more departments, with your partners, because the data is organized and it's no longer in a data silo. It decouples IT from business. IT can use any technology they wish, and business can use any technology they wish to consume the data. And since you're not moving the data stays where it is. It's going to reduce your cost for the data management, for data movement, and generally is going to improve your deployment project. It's going to improve your data management. So again, it's all about accessing data where it is, making data accessible in the form and shape the consumer wishes to access it, and really utilizing this logical data fabric as your data management enterprise ecosystem of the future. Thank you all for joining.
Thanks, Inessa. And thanks to Ruben, who actually had to take off. There's some kind of emergency in his building, so hope everything is okay there. We don't actually have any questions from the audience at this point. Type them quickly if you do have questions. But Inessa, if do you have anything you just like to add at this point, or any comments you'd like to add?
Yeah, actually, there are a couple of comments. I found it very interesting when we keep talking about data access, and it's all about exposing data to different consumers. But when we tie to our real life, so for instance, I have a couple of kids. If I go into their room and I try to find something, it's pretty much impossible, as with most parents. But if I ask them, show me a specific object, show me a specific toy, show me a specific book, they can easily find it. And the reason for that is the same as we see in data management. You have the business owner, you have that domain specialist who knows where the data is. They know the structure of the data. They know the benefit of the data, and they can find it easily. So if you continue to taking the data and start moving it into a larger ecosystem, such as a data lake or data warehouse, you might be actually breaking that business analyst knowledge. You might be actually removing that expertise of them being able to find data quickly. So you got to have that fine balance about when is the right choice to move data using ETL processes, when is the right choice to leave data where it is. And yes, you do want to break the data silos, but you also want to keep the data expertise. And I think this is where this fine line comes in. Is like, what is the optimal solution? And that's going to be on your business use case. The business has to drive the proper solution. So it's not going to be always ETL, it's not going to be always data virtualization. Most likely, it is going to be a combination of multiple technologies depending on the business use case.
Great, great. Well, thank you. And a lot of food for thought there, a lot of lot of good ideas. So thanks for joining us. Now, Inessa, do you have time? Do you have a few minutes to go to the networking area in Feedloop after the session?
Absolutely, I'll be there.
Okay, great. So if you want to continue the conversation with Inessa, go to in Feedloop, go to networking, then groups, then track A, and that's where she'll join you. Excuse me. Thanks to everyone. Thanks to Inessa once again, and thanks to Ruben. Again, I hope everything's okay where he is. And we'll look forward to seeing you tomorrow. Everything continues tomorrow morning with our keynote with Seth Early of Early Information Science and Kevin Klein of SolarWinds. And that's all starts at 9 o'clock. We'll be back with a full day of sessions. The exhibit hall will be back open. Of course, you can see Denodo there and all of our other exhibitors. And we look forward to seeing you then. Thanks again.